You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me for the Thursday edition here of Point of View. We certainly have a lot to cover today, and I hope you'll stay with us through the entire program. Going to be talking about what you can do to reach out to those who are hungry right in your area of influence, and so we'll be talking about that. Texas really beginning to reassess whether or not to continue down the road of reopenings, and so we'll talk about that and what Governor Greg Abbott has proposed. The survey shows most Americans really aren't comfortable going back to religious services. We'll talk about what that means. Later on, we'll get into the bill by Senator Rick Scott. And again, that is a very important piece of legislation that has been put forward. But again, Senator Tim Scott actually is an individual, African-American Republican, with a very good bill. But the Democrats yesterday decided, we'll just block it. Even if they said it was inadequate, okay, you could add amendments. So they didn't even want to talk about that. So we'll get into that. We'll get into various statutes and what can and is being done in that regard. And so that just gives you a little bit of an overview. Later on in the next hour, we'll have Foster Freeze. After that, we'll have Mark Mittelberg, as well as Jacki Daily Show. It's just going to be a great program. But let me, if I can, immediately go to Mike Beeson. He is a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin, has had extensive background in the business world, business development, finance, mergers, acquisitions, has led a number of mission teams to various countries around the world, and in addition to that, has provided senior leadership at Prestonwood Christian Academy and currently serves as the Minister of Missions for Prestonwood Baptist Church. We're going to be talking about the Hunger Project. So, Mike, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Kerby, thank you so much for having me today.
Let's, if we can, talk about the need, because people might say, hunger-wise, there's a problem with hunger. We have so much food. And I remember when I began to talk about the need, right, even in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex for providing food, I had an actual elected official say, we got lots of food. Farmers are producing it all. I said, yeah, well, the problem is, number one, they're producing it for hospitals and for schools and for other venues where they are no longer meeting. Number two, there's just a real need for the fact that for some people they live in food deserts. And another factor is that even if you might say, hey, I know where my meal's coming from, there's just a fair number of people that don't. So help us understand what the need is right now in terms of food and the supply chain for food.
Yes, that is great comments that you had made, and you know, throughout the years, my wife and I had traveled all over the world, a lot of third world country travel, and while we traveled, we obviously bumped into groups of people who were starving, and so that was always something that we. Both of us were born and raised right here in North Texas. It was something that we felt as we came back home that wasn't something that we had to deal with here in North Texas. Several months ago, I read a statistic that was sent out by the North Texas Food Bank. This was pre-coronavirus pandemic,
okay,
that there were about 800,000 people in the 13-county North Texas region who did not know where their next meal was coming from. And so I remember reading that number, Kerby, and I remember thinking into my mind that 800,000 people out of, maybe 7 or 8 million people, that was just not that was just not something I was willing to bypass. And so, I've told friends that there are, millions of people in North Texas that follow Jesus Christ. And the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of people who are going hungry in our own community is just not is just not right.
Well, and again, let's, if we can, talk about what we can do, because the Hunger Project is part of Prestonwood Cares initiative, and I really want people to first of all know how to connect up with you and to actually know what they can do, because you've partnered with a number of other ministries and organizations: Collin County, Dallas County, Denton County, to mention just a few. You've partnered with USDA Farmers for Families Food Box Program and a number of others. But talk about what is available and how we can help.
Yes, Kerby. Prestonwood Cares is an initiative, a compassion ministry of Prestonwood Baptist Church. When the coronavirus, when we all woke up that day back in March during the pandemic, we began hearing, literally within days, we began hearing stories of people that were suffering around North Texas in things that were related to the pandemic, but not specifically health concerns caused by the virus, perhaps due to unemployment and various other issues. The numbers of people who were being in need of food, which is referred to as food insecurity, the number of people were changing. I read a number sometime back in the middle to the latter part of April that may or may not be something similar today, but that 800,000 number of people in North Texas that was a January number had grown to around 3 million people, which is somewhere near one-third of the population of North Texas. The Hunger Project was birthed right around that same time in the middle part of March, and it was something that we felt that we could, through the Hunger Project, seek to alleviate hunger by literally partnering with area ministries and organizations to provide food resources to those food insecure individuals and families in the name of Jesus Christ. And we literally did so in those early days by putting boxes out at all the Prestonwood campuses and asking people to drop off a canned good or a boxed item or two each time they went to their grocery store. And in those early days, that just started. Everybody could participate, whether you were 10 years old or 80 years old. You could purchase one extra canned good, boxed good, bagged good. That has since grown. Obviously, we're providing, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 pounds of food each week out into the community. And over the past month, we became partners with the USDA Farmers to Family program, which has allowed us to provide food at a greater extent to people throughout North Texas that are looking for their next meal.
Mike, I need to take a break. I assume you can stay on for just a little longer, because I think some people want to say, okay, how do we get involved, and where would that take place, and a few other things. So I want to talk about this idea of the Hunger Project, which is an initiative from Prestonwood Cares. And if you are interested, get something to write with, because we will certainly give you that information. We'll see if we can also find a way to put a link on the website here so you can find that as well. You don't think about hunger except when you go overseas, but you should, because maybe even right next door there's somebody with a need, and you could meet it as well. But you can also join with this project, and we'll talk about how to do so right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You've heard most of them before. They're little phrases and one-liners that Christians and even non-Christians say in order to encourage you. You might be going through some tough struggles, and they remind you, God won't give you more than you can handle. At a funeral for a child, someone will likely explain, God gained another angel. And of course, there are millions of people who believe that God just wants you happy, and you need to believe in yourself. Fortunately, Shane Pruitt has been willing to tackle these and other false one-liners in his new book, 9 Common Lies Christians Believe. He was on the Point of View radio talk show recently to discuss his book. Shane wrote about these common lies because of his own experience. When his wife and he adopted a disabled child from Uganda, they faced numerous surgeries for him and major emotional challenges. That is why his first chapter addresses the lie that God won't give me more than I can handle. He takes on that misunderstanding both with personal examples and sound biblical interpretation. Some of the lies we believe have been challenged in society. Common lie number 5 says you must follow your heart. Mike Rowe is known for his work on such TV programs as Dirty Jobs and Returning the Favor. No doubt you have seen his YouTube videos or TED Talks about how we are doing a disservice to so many young people by telling them merely to follow their heart. Shane also addresses some important theological errors. Common lie number 6, God doesn't really care, and common lie number 8 is, I don't think God likes me. He hears these comments not only in this country, but even when he has traveled to Africa. I recommend this book for a sermon series, for small groups, and for individual study. We need to reject these lies and embrace God's truth on these issues. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we were talking with Mike Beeson. Maybe we'll connect up with him in just a minute. We were talking about this hunger project, and I think it illustrates a good point, and that is you can maybe find out about food banks. You can find out about what various churches are doing, and this one is part of the Prestonwood Cares Initiative and things of that nature. But on the other hand, don't wait for an organization. You may notice that your neighbors across the street haven't been to the grocery store. You just get talking to them and said, I've lost my job and I don't know where my next paycheck is going to come, or I'd only have a little bit of food in the refrigerator. You know, all those kinds of questions that sometimes just come up when you're chatting. Well, take an opportunity right then to make a difference. And so that would certainly be the case. And if we can connect back up with him in a minute, we will do our best. But if nothing else, just wanted you to be aware of what is called the Hunger Project. And for those of you, of course, that either attend Prestonwood Baptist Church or actually drive by it, there is a fairly simple way to do that. And if you don't, there are things you can do in your community. But it looks like, do we have him down? I think we have Mike Beeson. Mike, thanks for joining us once again.
Thank you, Kerby. Glad to be here.
Talk about what we can do to get involved, because it seems to me that there are a number of people that are saying, okay, I'm in, I want to help. What can I do? What's my next step?
Yeah, and absolutely, it is an easy solution. The solution is for each one of us, as we're shopping for our own household needs, just to really remember that there are people just right around us that don't have food and do not know where their next meal is coming from. So as you're at the grocery store purchasing for your own family, just simply purchase an extra canned good or a boxed item or a bagged item, and take that item and locate near you a ministry or organization that actually collects that food. The North Texas Food Bank is a regional provider of food to organizations all over, or there's organizations just like ours at Prestonwood, where at each one of our Prestonwood campuses there are boxes out on the property so that someone can drive by and drop off food, which then goes out into the community through organizations like ours to help feed those who are in need of food.
Now, again, we broadcast certainly in the North Texas area this hour, but there are people all over the country listening to this as well. But it's certainly, I think, relevant to the fact that if somebody wanted to contact you, maybe the best way is to go to, PrestonwoodMissions.org, in case they have some information or they wanted to know some more, or maybe they've got a whole number of canned goods they've had, which they thought they were going to use for some kind of outreach and didn't, and would like to donate those to you. So is that the best way to connect up with you?
That is, and Kerby, you bring up a very good point. What we're dealing with right here in North Texas is a mirror of what is being dealt with across the United States. And so anyone who lives in the United States, the same solution exists where they can purchase an extra food item or two and then find someone in their own community. And we'd be happy to help connect them with someone in their own community that can then take that piece of food and put it out into the community. And Kerby, you bring up another point. It is not only a situation that we deal with in the United States. Organizations like ours and others are trying to deal with the same situation and scenario that's going on in all other countries and continents.
Well, and some of us have gone on mission trips. One of my Sunday school leaders in the Bible fellowship class is over in Romania. I was supposed to be in Hungary, but they figured they could do it without me this time. But COVID has changed some things. But again, if people want to know more about missions, they can contact you. If they want to know more about the Hunger Project or any other activities, again, PrestonwoodMissions.org. And so, Mike, thank you for letting me keep you on for a few more minutes, because I think people hear about a need and they go, how do I plug in? And so if they certainly want to go to that website, PrestonwoodMissions.org, they can contact you. But as I've said before, don't wait for an organization. You may have people in your community, people that you walk past that say, I just have a few things in the refrigerator and that's all I've got. And you could be the hands and feet of Jesus just by taking the initiative. So thanks for sharing that, and we'll come back to it and talk about it again in the future. So thank you, Mike.
Kerby, I'm honored to be on with you today. Thank you.
Let's, before we take a break, talk about a couple of issues. Since most of you listening this hour do listen on the state of Texas, I know we have a few other stations that tune in all the way across the country. And of course, we have a national hour. We have 260 stations starting at 1 o'clock. And I'll leave some of the more national program issues there. But this one, even though it's a Texas story, really is a national story as well. And that is the decision coming from the governor of the state of Texas, Greg Abbott, who said now the state will pause its efforts to reopen the economy because they're seeing the number of confirmed coronavirus infections spiking, and they're starting to see hospitals begin to fill. Now, the answer we've oftentimes got from people is, well, just because we're getting more infections doesn't mean that we are overloading the hospital. Well, sometimes there is a relationship. Sometimes the infections go up because you do catch people that are asymptomatic or have just a minor bout with the COVID-19 disease. But the bottom line is some of this has changed rather dramatically, so much so, which we talked about briefly yesterday, if you didn't hear me say that, because I think I said it in one of the later hours, was that you now have statements made by the governors of, are you ready? New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey that are saying we now are probably going to reverse this. Remember when there was a concern about having people from New York or New Jersey going to certain states in the South? Now they are saying we might actually implement, and seem like they really are going to try to implement, a 14-day quarantine if you come from Texas or Arkansas Arizona, some of the real hot spots right now, Florida, and want to go to New York, Connecticut, or New Jersey. So that illustrates something as well. Of course, the governor, Greg Abbott, has been warning of a mounting catastrophe, this article says, for days, as new cases began to rise precipitously, first in Houston, then in the Dallas Metroplex, and even in other cities like Austin, San Antonio, and El Paso. Those are sort of course, the population centers. Greg Abbott, the governor, said businesses that are already allowed to operate under the current reopening phase will continue to do so, but what he's really trying to do right now is not go any further down the road. It would be hard to have a U-turn, but nevertheless, that may come, if not in the state of Texas. I am pretty sure it will happen in some of these other, especially blue states. Experts, according to this particular article, it said have watched with growing alarm as the number of confirmed cases in Texas rise past 125,000. The state is dealing with an estimated 50,000 active cases, which is now one of the highest in the nation. Of course, we have the second highest population in the nation, so in some respects that is the case. And Texas, back to the real issue, has actually added more than 5,000 new cases on each of the last 2 days. And the number of overall cases has doubled since the end of May. So we'll be watching that in particular in the state of Texas. And just before we take a break, a very interesting survey came from American Enterprise Institute, which was a far-ranging study of how people have related to COVID-19. But one part of that, which was reprinted in our friends ministrywatch.com, which is a great place to go to get some of this information, found that basically 64%, or almost 2/3 of Americans, said they were somewhat uncomfortable or very uncomfortable attending in-person worship services. Over the last couple of weeks, we've tried to document how this has gone with some of the smaller churches, not just in Texas, but elsewhere, and then now some of the larger mega churches. But when you have almost 2/3 of Americans say they would feel uncomfortable being in an in-person worship service, I think illustrates, again, we're in this for the long haul. Even among those who reported that their congregations were offering in-person worship in the past week, 56% of those respondents said they chose not to go. So it is kind of interesting that we are dealing with that. It's a pretty extensive survey, by the way, by the American Enterprise Institute. They surveyed more than 3,500 Americans and deal with some of those issues. And we're asking a lot of questions that had nothing to do with church or anything like that. But nevertheless, just an illustration that if you are a pastor, a Sunday school leader, a Bible fellowship leader, and you're thinking that everybody's going to feel comfortable getting back together, I don't think so. I had this one series that I've done that was supposed to end so that we would be back in some kind of Sunday school class by July 11th. Now I'm hearing August 1st, and who knows what it will actually be, the actual date in which we even have in-person Bible fellowship and Sunday school classes. So we have a lot more to do in that regard and a lot more to address, and we will certainly talk about that today. We come back, though, I did want to get into a couple of other issues. If nothing else, I thought we were interested in police reform. Well, according to the Senate Democrats, they just don't like the one by Senator Tim Scott. Okay. Put up or shut up is the phrase that comes to mind, so we'll talk about that right after these important messages.
If you thought the first half of 2020 was newsworthy, can you even imagine what's coming in the next 6 months? Coronavirus, the economy, social unrest, and an election. One thing I know, Point of View plans to be here for every important event, and as June comes to a close, so does our fiscal year. God has provided, but we're still a long way from where we need to be prepared for this important time. As Kerby says in his most recent letter, both Point of View and you have been brought together for such a time as this. God always knows what we need to be prepared, and this is the time to ask yourself, what is my role? Do your part to strengthen God's people for the days to come. Make Point of View your megaphone for the stretch run of 2020. Visit pointofview.net/team and do what you can. Or call 1-800-347-51 51. This is not a time where we can afford to be silent. It is time for action. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again,
is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, the number is 1-800-351-1212. Love to hear from some of you as well. The governor has been both praised and criticized, mostly criticized. Criticized because he didn't do enough, if you will, to require more people to wear masks and to exercise social distancing, but certainly criticized from others, saying he shouldn't have even allowed various county judges to implement orders about masks and close down different operations. So I'd love to get your thoughts about that, because it is one of those issues that is front and center. Unless you think that the mask is only an issue of health, apparently a mask is also an issue of social justice. I did mention this yesterday, but again, it was not on this particular hour. But it has to do with the fact that the health department in Lincoln County in Oregon, and you've probably heard about this by now, has directed that any resident 12 years or older is to wear a mask in indoor settings when you're outside of your own home, or outdoors if you're going to be near individuals where social distancing may be difficult. But the one glaring exception is this only applies to Caucasians. It exempts non-Caucasians, or later referred to, as you might imagine, people of color. And it has generated an enormous amount of response from various individuals. One saying, "Attention, county commissioners of Lincoln County, Oregon, you have hired crazy people to work for you." And certainly that is the case. One individual said, "Well, how much color gets you a no mask pass?" In other words, if I got enough melanin in my skin, do I not have to wear a mask? And then, of course, some others are typing in words like science or hoax or social justice or all the rest. So nevertheless, masks have become a political hot potato, football, whatever illustration you want to use. And it's just one more issue that is front and center during the fact that we are seeing a pickup, an increase in the rise of number of infections and the number of people checking into hospitals, not just in the state of Texas, but around the country. And I did mention just a few minutes ago, if you look at the hot spots, the places where the increase has been the greatest, Arizona, Arkansas, Texas, a variety of others, tend to be more of the Sun Belt type or southern type states. Interestingly enough, some of the blue states right now have some of the lowest. Well, that's because they went through their, if you will, peak for a while. Plus, they also have some lockdown orders still in place. So those are some issues that we can talk about. And if you'd like to, 1-800-351-1212. Senator Tim Scott has to be one of the most frustrated individuals on the United States Senate, because he has worked for some time to put together what is called the Justice Act, Just and Unifying Solutions to Invigorate Communities Everywhere Act. And they always love these acronyms or acrostics, whatever you want to call them. He is, of course, the only African American on the Republican side, only one of two African Americans in the U.S. Senate. And if nothing else, kudos to the Republican Party, at least for trying, because he certainly provides a vision of the fact that if indeed we're concerned about what's happening in the black population, certainly let's let a black senator address that. John Cornyn, who actually was standing behind him, probably knows as much, if not more, about the whole criminal justice system, having been an attorney general in the state of Texas and having studied this and worked with this issue for such a long period of time in the United States Senate. But the image, or if you will, the optics of having an African American speak to this issue is much better than someone else that could also focus on this. And the bill, as the Democrats were telling us, is maybe isn't all that we'd want. First of all, I also recognize that in politics is of what is the possible, not the perfect. Sometimes you end up with bills because of compromise. They aren't exactly what you want, but at least we got the requisite number of votes. And so on the one hand, there are some concerns, even by various people that would consider themselves to be conservatives, that it does try to constrain the no-knock warrants, but maybe doesn't do enough in that regard, and so that could have been fixed with an amendment. There's some that have also said, there are some comments there about neck restraints and non-lethal forces that, again, if you don't get them specific, you just think this through. If you're trying to bring down someone who has already swung at you, broke out of their handcuffs, refused to go down, there's only a few kind of non-lethal opportunities you have, and one of those to get them in a hold that brings them to the ground. And if you are completely eliminated from any kinds of restraints, what do you go to next? We can try to go to your taser and hope that a person not completely strung out on methamphetamine might actually go down if hit with the taser. But what if the bad guy takes the taser? I think we saw that recently. The only thing left is you go to your sidearm, and that's not what we want there either. So there's some people that said, okay, maybe we should work on that a little bit. And, of course, one of the things that was not in the Justice Act is the issue of qualified immunity. So where are we in all of this? After such a very good presentation by Senator Tim Scott, we announced yesterday that it seemed, from the point of view of people watching the potential debate, that Democrats in the Senate were convinced that they might gain control of the Senate in November, so they really don't want to pass any piece of legislation. They don't even want to make it anything other than an election issue rather than something that has actually been addressed. And more importantly, it's also that they recognize that by hoping that they take over the U.S. Senate, and by not even considering the piece of legislation, they will still be spared from the mainstream media and not have to pay any political price for obstruction. And so far, we'll see what that is. Because last night, this is what actually took place. The Senate Democrats actually did block this particular bill that was put forward by Senator Tim Scott and basically the entire Republican constituency. And if you say, wait a minute, the Republicans have a majority in the Senate, so they should be able to bring it to a vote. Nope, because we still have the filibuster. And so when all the votes were counted, all they could come up with were 55 votes, which I'd like to at least find out who were the few Democrats that actually were willing to say, we at least have to have a debate about this. But most of them simply, I guess you'd say the other 45 said, we don't even want to debate it. We don't even want to try to add amendments to it. And so as a result, that was the end of all of the discussion. And so now the House is scheduled to actually consider a bill today. That bill I've not had a chance to look at and evaluate, but I don't really need to, because if you listen to this program any length of time, we've had Representative Van Taylor on many times telling us that the kind of legislation that gets thrown together, and I do mean thrown together by some of the Democrats in the House, are really kind of message bills. They're just a series of all sorts of wish lists. We wish this and this and this and this. Probably there's even a section there about defunding police departments and who knows what else. And there's never even an attempt to pass something that has a chance to be seriously considered in the United States Senate. To be fair, the attempt by Senator Tim Scott in the Senate was an attempt, at least, to come up with a piece of legislation that both Republicans and Democrats in the Senate and Republicans and Democrats in the House could agree with, to address the very issue that's supposedly why we are seeing so much turmoil in the streets. But after the break, I do want to point out that much of the attempt to tear down statues and to deface places and to engage in rioting and vandalism almost has nothing to do now with the death of George Floyd 3 weeks ago. But the point is that it did surface opportunity. Sometimes there are those very fleeting political moments in time where something really got somebody's attention. They said, you know, there's something we really need to do, and we can do that. And here are some concrete steps that can be provided by the federal government. Recognizing again that most of the issues of policing are state and local, but at least the federal government can have some kind of influence because, after all, it provides some of the funding. It's not a lot. Matter of fact, I mentioned yesterday that the federal share of the New York Police Department budget is 6%. But if I all of a sudden refused to give you 6% because you didn't follow some of the principles in a national police reform bill, I think that'd get your attention. So if nothing else, this was, I think, a valiant attempt on the part of Senator Tim Scott. But the reality is it didn't pass. It wasn't even considered. Now, if indeed, and it won't happen today, but if indeed, think about if Republicans in the House tried to block the Democrat vote now being considered. Do you think that'd be in the news? I think it'd be front page. But here, Democrats prevented even a serious consideration of a police reform bill. And this may be the only place you hear about it, right here on Point of View. By the way, that's another reason why you might want to support this ministry. And we do have a banner there that gives you that opportunity. Come back, we'll talk a little bit about some of these statues and some of the other issues in the news. All that coming up right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me also mention that there are just a number of things that we're going to be talking about the next couple of hours. And one of those, of course, is the whole issue of how legislation is actually convened and how it is considered. And so we're going to be talking in about 15 minutes with Foster Freeze. One of his arguments and one of the pieces of legislation that he supports, and we have information about it on our website, is entitled One Bill, One Subject. And if you think that's an important issue, Guess what? I've actually had people calling this program in the past that say, why is it we have these bills where they just stuff all this pork and things into it? Of course, we saw this so very much when we supposedly were passing legislation we thought was there to help individuals that had lost their job. And in the process found out that a lot of that money went to wealthy universities, the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts, and all sorts of things. So there has been a push for one bill, one subject. And I think we would be a lot better off. Every time you have the word comprehensive, you know it's going to be a disaster. Comprehensive immigration reform, comprehensive health care reform. It never works because it doesn't focus on the specifics. If we have specific issues, let's have specific bills. And when you can come together with funding any kind of project and then start using that in a way to just continue to run up the national deficit, which is on the backs of our children and grandchildren. So that is certainly one thing we're going to talk about. The other that he talks about, and I love to talk about this with him as well, healthcare transparency. Went to the doctor the other day, and they, in this case, didn't run tests, but whenever they do, I just always kind of roll my eyes a little bit saying, okay, that is always a little bit of a roll in the dice. Matter of fact, we did take somebody recently to the emergency room, and $13,000 later, that turned out to be what you probably would have feared. Now, compare that to when you go to your grocery store, you know what things are going to cost. Compare that to when maybe you're out of lockdown there, go to a restaurant. You not only have a menu that shows you what is available, but also what the price is. And on more than one occasion, when I've been in a restaurant, I've already sort of mentally figured up the bill, already mentally figured up the tip, and I know that before they bring the check. That is not the case when you go to an emergency room. That is not the case when you go to the doctor. And so that's another thing we'll talk about in terms of healthcare transparency. And we may get into a few other topics, but again, we certainly appreciate Foster Freeze. Then I'll get into what does Black Lives Matter want? Very good piece by the Heartland Institute. And over the last couple of weeks, I've tried to post some different articles from different sources so that you could read those, because a lot of people get caught up in, well, I certainly believe that Black Lives Matter. Of course they do. But the movement is run by individuals who, as we shared earlier this week, have a Marxist agenda. I'm not calling them that. That's what they call themselves. And so as a result, as we read some of that in the next hour, you'll say, looks like some of this was copied right out of the Communist Manifesto. But just before we take a break, a couple of articles. One that the other day was talking about all the different statues that have been taken down. And I've posted a very good piece here by Conrad Black that takes you through kind of a whole long, detailed analysis of that. But in the interest of time, I won't go into all that right now, other than just simply say, when you start looking at this growing list of those that have been destroyed or defaced, Abraham Lincoln, why? George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Ulysses S. Grant. I talked a lot about that just the other day in terms of an individual that, if nothing else, was probably the most supportive of African Americans during the Civil War and ended the Civil War. Churchill, Gandhi. How did Gandhi get in that list? Miguel de Cervantes pointed out Cervantes was actually a slave, but they took down his statue too. Robert the Bruce, Voltaire. I think he would be a fan of most of the liberals, and you can go through the long, long list. And then one of those, the abolitionist Matthias Baldwin and guitarist Stevie Ray Vaughan. What do Cervantes and Stevie Ray Vaughan said? Does this article say? Actually, other than they're made in bronze, nothing else. And more and more people are just starting to say, this just illustrates that the people out in the streets are idiots. And I'd dare not to use that word very often, but they are. I mean, they are tearing down things and don't even know why they're tearing them down. This is the same generation that we pointed out, because of the miseducation of them in the schools, couldn't put the Civil War in the proper half-century category, did not know who won the Civil War, did not know who the United States fought in World War II. So are we really surprised that they're tearing down just any statue that seems to bother them? I guarantee one of them or somebody, it might even be a white supremacist group that starts to tear down a Martin Luther King Jr. statue. Then we're going to start hearing about it. But just the other night, the president was speaking at Turning Point, and I thought I'd give you a couple of his remarks and also what at least he and his administration want to do about this. And that is, President Trump said the left-wing mob is trying to demolish our heritage so they can replace it with a new oppressive regime. We'll hear about that when we talk about what are some of the stated goals of Black Lives Matter movement. They're tearing down statues, desecrating monuments, and purging the centers. He said it's not the behavior of a peaceful political movement. It's the behavior of totalitarians and tyrants and people who don't love our country. Went on to say a little bit later, the left is not trying to promote justice or equality or lift up the downtrodden. They have one goal, the pursuit of their own political power. And if you give power to people that demolish monuments and attack churches and seize city streets and set fire on buildings, then nothing is sacred and no one is safe. Again, if you think that that is wrong, explain to me why it is, because I think once you allow the mob mentality out on the streets, no one is safe indeed. Okay, you might be saying, well, what are we doing about it? Because unfortunately, we've seen more and more pictures of various monuments being torn down. And police officers are standing there just trying to make sure that nobody gets hit by the falling statue, nobody gets accidentally caught on fire when they're trying to burn the American flag on the top of one of those statues. Well, President Trump has now actually dealt with this because he's now invoking, maybe too little too late, what's called the Veterans Memorial Preservation Act. That was actually signed into law back in 2003. I don't need to look and find out why. But first of all, the act allows for fines and 10-year jail sentences for anyone who willfully injures or destroys any structure, plaque, statue, or other monument on public property commemorating the service of any persons or persons in the armed forces of the United States. Well, let's hope it happens, but the reality is we haven't seen much of it, and there is probably some question that I think you have in your mind about, is anybody ever going to do anything about this? Because there just seems to be too much political will lacking on the sides of both political parties. Nobody wants to call out what has been taking place there. And so as a result, it just continues. You know the principle, if you've ever had a kid, when you don't punish wrongdoing, what happens? You get more of it, right? Pretty simple. And we haven't done any kind of punishing to those individuals that have been tearing down statues. It's pretty obvious, seeing these pictures, that we can figure out who some of them are, even those that wear a mask. Not hard to figure these out. There are all sorts of ways that we could bring justice to them, but instead they think they're bringing justice to us by tearing down any statue they don't like, even if the individual was a former slave, an abolitionist, because they don't even know what abolitionist means. Somebody jokingly said the typical millennial probably thinks abolitionist, that's just some rock band from the 1960s. So you just are dealing with people that are just not very smart. But we're going to take a break. Foster Free's with us next, and as we go to a break, you can find some of these articles and read them for yourself, post them, and interact with other people on them. And we'll talk about some of the issues of interest to him, and we encourage you to click on that button that says, for such a time as this, give now, because we are coming to the last few days before the end of our fiscal year, and we would greatly appreciate it if you could help us out. Let's take a break. Foster Free's with us next, and we'll be back right after these messages.
Have you ever said, well, it can't get any worse than this? Here in 2020, I've stopped saying that. Just when you think difficulties have to end, it's something else. Never has there been a more important time to get good information about what's really happening in the nation and the world. And that means never has there been a more important time to jump on board the Point of View Truth Team. You have a critical role to play in stemming the tide of evil and participating in the cause for good. We have been called together for such a time as this, and all it takes is just a few minutes to visit our website or call us and join the team. Do that today. June is the end of our fiscal year, a time we're looking at what we can do in the second half of the year with so many big events ahead. And we really need to know that you are with us in the fight. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. We cannot afford to be silent. It is time for action. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me for the Thursday edition of Point of View. Over the next couple of hours, we're going to have a chance to hear from so many great guests, and we'll be talking in just a minute with Foster Freeze. Later on, we'll talk with Mark Mittelberg and Jacki Deason. We also have posted some articles. What does Black Lives Matter want? I've posted a couple of those before, but this one goes into a lot more detail from the Heartland Institute. As we've been warning you, the unfortunate thing did take place. Senator Tim Scott has put together a very good piece of legislation in the Senate, which would actually be providing some reform for policing, and yet, as we pointed out yesterday, might indeed be blocked by the Senate by the Democrats, and was only 55 votes, and you need 60. And so it's almost like the Democrats know that they're not going to pay any political price for obstruction of a very good piece of legislation, which admittedly earlier in the week we talked about had some problems, but could be fixed by amendments. But when you don't even want to debate it, you can see where we go there. Also, one I've posted on statues and civilization. We'll certainly get to that later this hour, but we are privileged to have for this first half hour here Foster Freeze. A couple of articles we're going to look at. One bill, one subject, and in addition to a link to his website, we'll also have a very good piece underneath that was written by Senator Rand Paul about Senate Bill 3845, which is the idea of a one bill, one subject legislation. We'll get into maybe the issue of healthcare transparency, and maybe even talk a little bit about the worldview behind some of the protest and turmoil we're seeing right now. So first of all, Foster Freeze been on this program many times before, launched Freeze Associates, one of the most successful mutual fund investments ever. He's been known for years as a philanthropist, also a candidate, and an individual that has taken on so many of these very important issues. And so Foster Freeze, it's just going to be great to hear your voice.
Kerby, it's always great to hear you and your enthusiasm, and you're right on all the topics. You kind of get it, and you must have gone to the same university I did.
I should have gone to University of Wisconsin. I have some friends that went there. I think, isn't that where you went? Yeah. No, I went. But anyway, let's talk about this. And you are always kind of getting the pulse of Americans. And Foster, just the other day, I had somebody call in and say, now explain to me why we couldn't have a requirement that the bill had to be on one subject. And I said, ding, 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 you really know what we're thinking about. And I think it came up because we talked about the coronavirus relief bill. And again, trying to provide relief to people that have been devastated by the lockdowns. But then all of a sudden we find out money going to wealthy universities and the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts. And this piece of legislation, there's one in the Senate, which I just mentioned, also one in the House, and there's some others that are being considered, are really an attempt to say, let's stop loading all of these bills with pork, and let's recognize that if you've got a specific problem, we need a specific piece of legislation. Tell us more if you might.
Well, I think whoever gave that question is right on. And there's 41 states, Kerby, which have that requirement to some degree, as well as Australia, Switzerland, and Ireland. And it allows people to kind of get engaged as people, as citizens, rather than letting the political elite kind of play games with the money. They treat the money as if it's kind of monopoly. They have no idea of the connection to the people that had to earn that money, just send it to them. And if people can realize what gets stuck in these bills, it's where they put in their favorite piece of pork. And Republicans and Democrats both are guilty of this, and so it's going to be a challenge to get this passed. And I'm so grateful for Rand Paul to get behind it. He introduced it a couple of years ago and recruited Mia Love in the Congress at that time to have a House version. And now we have the movement gaining some momentum because of this ridiculous bill where they voted for ventilators in the same bill for the Kennedy Center. So you've touched on a raw point that the American public are fed up with.
One of the things I always encourage our listeners to do, Foster, is to take some action. We might even create this into an action item, but right now, if you scroll down to the bottom, because that's where it is at the moment, one subject at a time, and it's a piece by, again, Senator Rand Paul. It comes from congress.gov/bill. So it actually tells you about the bill, and we'll probably do some things in that regard in the future. And we've always said that you really don't want to see how pork is made or how even all sorts of various meat products are made or how bills are made. So we recognize some of that back and forth, but it's certainly a great illustration of a corrective solution. But I thought I would get to another one that you and I have talked about many times before. And even when you've not been on the air, I just pointed out the other day, it took someone to the emergency room, came back with a bill that was a whole lot larger than I thought it was going to be. And yet, if I go into a grocery store, I know what it's going to cost me when I roll the shopping cart up to the counter. When I go to a restaurant, I have most of the time figured out what the cost of the bill will be and even figured out the tip. But boy, when I go into a doctor's office or an emergency room, I don't have a clue. And so hospital and healthcare transparency seem like another very big issue. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm thrilled that Senator Cassidy introduced it in the Senate, 3318, and Mike Gallagher in the House, 5916. So these two leaders are going to, I believe, make this happen. And if you take the polling, I believe Pew polled it, it's 80%. 80% Republicans and Democrats. Walk around and do our own sort of focus groups, walk through the grocery store and say, what do you think? We can't find a Hillary supporter or Bernie supporter who doesn't give us a high five. And the bill has now been shrunk down to one line, so it's very simple for people to understand. Quote, all providers of healthcare products and services to the public are required to disclose cash prices on the Internet point of sale within 90 days of passing this legislation. Now, just yesterday, the courts affirmed President Trump's executive order on healthcare transparency, but he comes at it from a different approach by requiring hospital insurance companies to disclose their contracts.
Yeah. I'm
not quite sure how that helps me as a consumer know what I'm going to pay. But the bill I'm talking about that Cassidy and Gallagher are on, they'll know exactly what they're going to pay. And it doesn't solve all the problems, Kerby, but it begins a process of reducing prices. When you have competition, you start reducing prices. I was asked to go to the hospital by my doctor to take a blood test for a blood clot I had. It was $73. I found that 1 mile away from that hospital for not 73 but 13. And so the chief executive officer was just given a $17 million adjustment to his pension plan on top of his annual $8 million salary. The American public, they're ready for this, Kerby. They're ready for us, and I think it's going to happen.
I think so, too. Let's take a break, and when we come back, I want to get into a couple of other issues, but if this came real quickly, and I know many of you maybe reach for a pen and say, okay, what are we talking about here? Senator Cassidy's bill, Senate Bill 3318, the House bill, Congressman Mike Gallagher, and that one is House Bill 5916, and that's on the issue of health care transparency, some really important issues. So, again, we have some of that information on our website. As you go there, you'll also, of course, see that we have a banner because as we get closer to our end of our fiscal year, we're encouraging you to support this ministry. We'll come back and recap a little bit on this one bill, one subject, healthcare transparency. And I thought we'd talk a little bit about the war, if you will, of ideas and the conflict of worldviews with Foster Freeze. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You've heard most of them before. They're little phrases and one-liners that Christians and even non-Christians say in order to encourage you. You might be going through some tough struggles, and they remind you, God won't give you more than you can handle. At a funeral for a child, someone will likely explain, God gained another angel. And of course, there are millions of people who believe that God just wants you happy, and you need to believe in yourself. Fortunately, Shane Pruitt has been willing to tackle these and other false one-liners in his new book, 9 Common Lies Christians Believe. He was on the Point of View radio talk show recently to discuss his book. Shane wrote about these common lies because of his own experience. When his wife and he adopted a disabled child from Uganda, they faced numerous surgeries for him and major emotional challenges. That is why his first chapter addresses the lie that God won't give me more than I can handle. He takes on that misunderstanding both with personal examples and sound biblical interpretation. Some of the lies we believe have been challenged in society. Common lie number 5 says you must follow your heart. Mike Rowe is known for his work on such TV programs as Dirty Jobs and Returning the Favor. No doubt you have seen his YouTube videos or TED Talks about how we are doing a disservice to so many young people by telling them merely to follow their heart. Shane also addresses some important theological errors. Common lie number 6, God doesn't really care, and common lie number 8 is, I don't think God likes me. He hears these comments not only in this country, but even when he has traveled to Africa. I recommend this book for a sermon series, for small groups, and for individual study. We need to reject these lies and embrace God's truth on these issues. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Foster Freeze with us, and boy, what a couple of months this has been. One of the banners we have there is, it says, for such a time as this, give now, and of course we talk about the uncertainty, and if you watch that banner on Point of View, you see that it has pictures of political leaders, and it has pictures of riots, it has pictures of hospitals and COVID-19 and a variety of other things, so don't forget that that is a link that we provide so that you can actually help us financially. We're coming to the end of our fiscal year, which is June 30th, and I just wanted you to know that is there. And some of the material we've been talking about is also at the website, including some we'll get to in just a minute on Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the statues. But I thought when we look at the incredible turmoil, Foster Freeze, there really is kind of a war of ideas, a battle of worldviews, a Christian worldview or a constitutional worldview that says that we need to have order, a rule of law. As I will say once we get to some of the things that are in the various Black Lives Matter website, this is being replaced by kind of a view of secularism, even of Marxism. And I'd love to get your thoughts because you've been watching this unfold just as we have as well.
Well, Kerby, look at the 22 candidates for the Democratic presidential race. You go through and count how many have a biblical worldview. And if you look at the contrast between that biblical worldview and secularism, a Christian, as a small kid, is told, Jesus loves you, this I know, because the Bible tells me so. And from early at our mother's knee, we learned that we have value and self-esteem because of God's love for us. And that allows us to have a good self-esteem if we happen to be serving God by carrying bedpans in a nursing home. But yet, where does a secular person get their self-esteem? They do not have that. So they have to have their self-esteem come from prestige, materialism, or power. And we've seen just evidence of what people will do to gain power and how they are willing to destroy the lives of other people and lie and deceive. And it's been quite disgusting to see the secular worldview, the secularists clamoring for that power at any cost, because that's where their self-esteem comes from. If you're a U.S. senator, your self-esteem is a lot higher than if you're a janitor. And so the other ways that the secular world gives themselves self-esteem is materialism. If I have a bigger house, a bigger car, or if I have a higher degree, if I'm a PhD, I'm a lot more self-esteem than someone who has graduated from high school. Where I love an old friend of mine, a missionary to Ghana, said, at the foot of the cross, the ground is level. Mm-hmm. And that's not a concept that the secularist wants to embrace.
Well, and again, as you point out, one of the things we've been talking about is what can pastors even address, and it seems to me that Genesis 1 talks about the fact that we're created in the image of God. Acts 17 says we're all of one blood. So some of these racial distinctions are done away with. And I've in the past talked about how really the distinctions in Colossians 3 between Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, even slave and free, are actually to be done away with. And like you said, the ground is level at the foot of the cross. And if nothing else, Christians should be talking about the fact that all individuals created in the image of God have value and dignity. And we should reject this political attempt right now to remake this country, because as I will be talking about in just a few minutes, from some of the things you see in Black Lives Matter, it really almost looks like it was copied out of the Communist Manifesto. So these battles are taking place right now, and we need to elect leaders in positions of authority. And I think we've learned during the lockdowns and everything else, Foster, that we maybe didn't always pay attention to who the mayor was, the county judge, the city council, but we're recognizing they have very significant influence over our lives as well, don't they?
Well, you'd be surprised how everybody gets in a position of power, how they'll use it. Even a silly example, I have a friend on the golf course, and he gets in a golf cart and he's driving along and it starts beeping. He's in a restricted zone back up, and the cart locks all up. So wow. the pro or the manager just decides he's going to have control of where that guy drives. And my friend looks down, he's in a gravel ditch, and somehow that has to be protected. So the quest for power manifests itself at the very, very lowest level. We talk about the federal government over states, but my heavens, look at the local governments, the power they will have over people as well. And I think that's something that we have to fight against and get people who are servants, not out there to fulfill their egos with power.
One other point I want to make is when almost every time I talk with you, we talk about civility, and I've got a booklet on that. And of course, I've got a booklet I'm holding up right now on racism and some of these others. But you and I have tried over the years to try to reach out to individuals where we may have some strong disagreements with them, but at least to help them get out of their tribe, get out of their silo for just a minute. And so while we're considering who you're going to vote for this November, I think you should also try to build some bridges. It may not always work, but I think this is something we need right now in a very polarized country.
Liberty Mutual, I believe, did a 4-minute video on Bob Vanderplas, who's Mr. Evangelical out in Iowa. He's the one who anointed Huckabee, then he anointed Santorum, then he anointed Cruz, and whatever he says is the candidate, the evangelical pastors really kind of embraced his wisdom. And he had Donna Redwing, head of the gay lesbian group in Iowa, call him and said, let's go out to lunch. In that 4-minute video, it describes how they became dear friends. Neither one of them changed their position on homosexuality or gay marriage, but Linda told all of her friends, don't call these Christians bigots anymore. And Bob Vanderplas has said every time he does a sermon, he thinks, now, how would Linda react to this? Or Donna react to this. So I think that potential you have there, if they can do that over that hotbed issue, you certainly can do it perhaps over taxation, immigration, education, school choice. But to be able to do it in a civil way, we've kind of lost that with the anarchy and the whole idea of people embracing violence to promote the agenda. Oh, incidentally, Kerby, we don't have a lot of time in this segment, so I want to make sure how much I am grateful for your ministry, and I want to make sure you've got a little financing for this. So whatever money you can raise between now and the end of June, I'd like to match it up to $50,000 if that'll help you a little bit.
Well, thank you so very much. You have been so generous over the years, and we certainly have appreciated all of that. So those of you listening right now, we have a match on the table, and we'll see if we can get that done between now and June 30th. Only a few days, so thank you very much. Let me very quickly, though, point people to fosterfreeze.com. Your first one is on the One Bill, One Subject, so I wanted people to find that material, and there's a way in which they can contact Congress about this. We also have information about that. And in the future, we want to put some material up there on the healthcare transparency bill. Again, Senate Bill 3318 and House Bill 5916. So those are some resources. And as you well know, we not only want to educate people, but we just have fostered a lot of activists out there, including people like yourself. It was just the other day I was seeing something, and they were talking about this particular organization, and they said, well, the major gift came from Foster Freeze. And I said, yeah, there we go again. You know, your fingers have been in so many different places, and sometimes I've been at events with you where you've been promoting one of those events. And so thank you for being one of the greatest philanthropists I've ever had a chance to meet.
Well, Kerby, yeah, I tell everybody it ain't my money, it's the Lord's. If it was mine, you wouldn't be getting one red dead cent. So don't give me any credit that I'm not entitled to.
Yeah, it is always great to have you on the program. And if I understood this, between now and June 30th, up to $50,000. So a dollar-to-dollar match. So thank you so very much, Foster.
Okay, well, a little permutation. I'll extend it to July 15th, give you a little more time.
Well, that's awful nice of you, too. Well, again, say hi to your sweet wife. I've enjoyed the few times we've ever been face-to-face. And, hey, if we can get out of this lockdown and get to see you again. Gosh, I want to get up there to Wyoming and Grand Tetons and some of that. So sooner or later, I'm going to get a chance to see you face-to-face, but it's just always a delight.
You're welcome.
Yes.
You're always welcome, Kerby. God bless.
One last time, his website is fosterfreeze.com. Freeze is F-R-E-S-S, but we make it very easy. We've already posted some information about Senate Bill 3845 by Senator Rand Paul. There's also H.R. 6635, and that's the One Bill, One Subject. So you can either go to his website, which is really very good on that, or we've given you all the information about that. We haven't posted anything today on the healthcare transparency because I didn't want to put 6 things on this site and get everybody confused. So we maybe next week we'll put the link there to Senate Bill 3318, which is sponsored by Senator Cassidy. 3 cheers for Senator Cassidy. And then you have House Bill 5916, which is Congressman Mike Gallagher. And again, 3 cheers for him as well. So those are 2 topics. You oftentimes find yourself saying, well, what can we do? Well, I know Senator Tim Scott's a little discouraged that he put together a piece of legislation, wasn't even given a chance to debate it in the Senate floor. I think you should pay attention to that next time people ask for your vote. Let's take a break. We got a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after this.
If you thought the first half of 2020 was newsworthy, can you even imagine what's coming in the next 6 months? Coronavirus, the economy, social unrest, and an election. One thing I know, Point of View plans to be here for every important event, and as June comes to a close, so does our fiscal year. God has provided, but we're still a long way from where we need to be prepared for this important time. As Kerby says in his most recent letter, both Point of View and you have been brought together for such a time as this. God always knows what we need to be prepared, and this is the time to ask yourself, what is my role? Do your part to strengthen God's people for the days to come. Make Point of View your megaphone for the stretch run of 2020. Visit pointofview.net/team and do what you can. Or call 1-800-347-5151. This is not a time where we can afford to be silent. It is time for action. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
A couple articles we put on the website for you to read. One on what does Black Lives Matter want, and also the whole idea of statues and civilization, which I'm going to just summarize since it's a fairly lengthy one, but also talk about, okay, as we're tearing down these statues, if we're vandalizing them, is anybody going to try to stop these individuals? And I will give you some news on that regard. But if you were just listening a few minutes ago, we had Foster Freeze with us, and he is such a great philanthropist, and I've been so impressed about where he has put his money in so many different ways, and oftentimes put together challenges to help everything from Rachel's Challenge and building various schools and digging water wells in Africa. And I mean, the list, it would take a long time to go through all the places that I'm aware of Foster Freeze. And the other day I was just reading about this particular website that I go to on a regular basis, and it was initially started by Tucker Carlson and his college roommate, and they were saying Tucker Carlson was going to step back from that because, after all, he's kind of busy doing a show every day. And so his basically college roommate friend decided to buy him out. And then, just as I'm reading through the article, the very bottom, it says, and the major supporter to this is Foster Freeze. I thought, I should have known. I mean, just so, again, thank you for his gifts. And most importantly, thank you for those of you that have maybe said, well, I've been thinking about supporting you between now and year's end, and our fiscal year ends June 30th. Foster Freeze says, okay, I'll tell you what, I will extend it. First, he was saying June 30th, then he said July 15th. Did I get that right? Everybody's shaking their head. So I guess we've got a little bit of time here. And so if you can help us out, that means now that is doubled. I was just clicking on the button here a minute ago, and we had a suggested donation of $50, so that would be $100. $100 would be $200. There's one, you go all the way down. We had one for $1,000. I have run into a few people over time that have said, I can probably give you $1,000. Love it, because, my wife and I have done that a few times in life, but not many. But that's just great. So nevertheless, that match is now on the table. And if you think that that's arbitrary, no, it isn't. I mean, it is actually something that is very specific. We work later with his people, and they want to know how much money was raised from this day, which would be June 25th to July 15th. Where they clicked on the banner, or they said they wanted to be part of the match, and then that is the amount that then they will send to us. Most of the time, if like a match was $50,000, we usually reach it. Sometimes we don't, and if it's like $30,000, then we get $30,000. So it really is one of those situations, because, and I appreciate the integrity upon which he uses that to say, look, I'm going to match it, but I'm not going to match what you didn't get. And I think that's wise. So your help will make the difference. Okay, let's get into this. Heartland Institute, we've interviewed some of them before, and they've just simply taken the time to go through what is on the website, Black Lives Matter. But I wanted to mention this one more time at least, because what we're starting to see are individuals saying, look, we recognize that black lives do matter. I agree with that. And as a matter of fact, the latest Pew Research said 67%, or two-thirds of American adults, support the idea of Black Lives Matter. Of course they do, but they don't understand that the movement is really in a very different direction. And as I've pointed out on this program before, some of the founders call themselves Marxists. So when we say they're using a Marxist philosophy, I'm not trying to denigrate them. That's how they describe themselves. But again, this particular article goes on for a couple pages, and I'm just going to give you the highlights and then encourage you to read it. And if at the end you want to send money to Black Lives Matter, knock yourself out. I think if you're a Christian, though, you're going to very quickly say, no, I don't want to. And there are some very good reasons why I do not. But first of all, one of those is, of course, reparations. Black Lives Matter demand reparations for past and continuing harms. And in case you're curious, in 2019, only 29% of Americans supported cash reparations to descendants of enslaved black people. So certainly that didn't work very well for individuals in that regard. And one of the things I have found just more recently by Thomas Sowell, have we reached the ultimate absurdity where some people are held responsible for things that happened before they were born, while other people are not held responsible for what they themselves are doing today? And I thought that was a pretty good question from Thomas Sowell that actually was a Twitter post a while back, but I found it again and just thought I'd pass that on. Black Lives Matter also demands guaranteed minimum livable income for all black people, which, again, when you guarantee it, then what's the incentive to go out and to work? They have a whole section here where they're calling for the reallocation of funds at the federal, state, and local level from policing and incarceration to long-term safety strategies such as education, local restorative justice services, and employment programs. And this is, of course, defunding the police. Put it in nice-sounding words, but now they're just blunt. Just defund the police. We don't want to send money to the police departments. There's no reason for that. Then there's some which you just say, these have nothing to do, as far as I can tell, with racial attitudes or anything else. Here's a direct quote: the retroactive decriminalization, immediate release, and record expungement of all drug-related offenses and prostitution, and reparations for the devastating impact of the war on drugs and criminalization of prostitution. Again, as a Christian, can you accept that? Here's another one. No, of course, Medicare for all, real, meaningful, and equitable universal health care, Medicare for all. This one really comes out of left field, according to this article. A divestment should from the industrial multinational use of fossil fuels and investment in community-based energy solutions. How does fossil fuels have anything to do with the issue of race? A progressive restructuring of tax codes at the local, state, and federal levels to ensure a radical and sustainable redistribution of wealth. We already have a redistribution of wealth, but they want a radical one. A right to restored land, clean air, clean water, housing, an end to exploitative privatization of natural resources. That's where they finally said, did they just take this from the Communist Manifesto? Which, of course, is part of the issue there as well, because you have part of, and it goes into that on the third page, kind of what's oftentimes called the Marxist creed and how that has been developed as well. Now, we more recently have had some people on various programs even talk about how they want to achieve this. And so one of the individuals who sometimes is called the Black Lives Matter tough guy, that would be Hawk Newsom, the New York chair of Black Lives Matter, was going around on all these different talk shows and talking about burn it down, time it's to burn it down. And so he was on the other night with Martha McCallum and just trying to get the sense, when you say burn it down, do you really mean burn it down? And so he said, and this is, again, Hawk Newsom, if this country doesn't give us what we want, then we will burn down this system and replace it. He says, now, I could be speaking figuratively. I could be speaking literally. It's just a matter of interpretation. Well, a little bit later, she was saying, why do you feel that violence has to take place? Of course, he says, well, this is a nation of violence, and, all the lines you've heard before. But then he argued that this is the most effective strategy, he says. He says, let's observe the history of the 1960s when black people were rioting. We had the highest growth in wealth and property ownership. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that, first of all, we got rid of we got civil rights laws. We got rid of Jim Crow laws. And for a while, the black family was still intact, which it's not now because of the welfare rules. But finally, he said, I don't condone nor do I condemn rioting. It's just telling you what I observed. A good follow-up question would have been, well, do you condone or condemn? So we're getting a lot of this, when I talk about burning it down, I could be speaking figuratively or I could be speaking literally. I don't condone rioting, but I don't condemn it either. This is the kind of lines you're starting to get right now. And the attempt, I think, was for him to go on these talk shows and to intimidate. And frankly, it seems to be working if you haven't been paying attention. Because when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about how few people are paying any kind of price for destroying or defacing various statues, destroying neighborhoods, defacing various public monuments. And so we'll come back and talk about, is there attempt now to change some of that? So we'll get into those issues as well. And of course, then we'll, in the next hour, spend some time talking about a couple of other topics. One will be Mark Mittelberg, I should say. He's with the Lee Strobel Center for Evangelism and Apologetics. Then we'll have Jacki Daily, who, by the way, is certainly well known to many of you because you've probably been able to hear or see some of the things she does through the Jacki Daily Show, and a senior fellow for the Texas Public Policy Foundation. So we'll get into religious liberty, maybe some energy issues, and all sorts of other topics that are front and center in her area of expertise. But we need to take a break. So when we come back, we'll continue our conversation right after these messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, let me talk about this other article that we have posted here. It is by Conrad Black, and I just titled it Statues and Civilization. And the point he's making is one that maybe caught a lot of us off guard. Of course, it was 3 weeks ago when we saw the death of George Floyd, and at the same time, that stimulated some protest. And I think then the anarchists in our culture and the Antifa and others said this is going to be a great time, just tear down these statues. And then when we did not punish anyone tearing down statues or defacing things or out there fighting in the streets, then what ended up is a whole-scale attempt to just tear down everything. And so he makes the case that it's really hard to even make a case that we should be tearing down all these statues of Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. But even if you think so, it kind of got out of hand real fast, because I've been making the list here, and this one just comes from the National Review just from the last couple of days, because we're talking about individuals that never were involved with the Confederacy in the Civil War. We're talking about Abraham Lincoln, who was actually on the other side. George Washington, okay, he's a slave owner, but still, Thomas Jefferson, U.S. Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, who was honored in many of the black churches when he died and worked to actually pass the 15th Amendment. And you start thinking about all of that. But then it just goes on to Winston Churchill, Gandhi. How did Gandhi get on this list? Cervantes, pointed that out the other day. Miguel de Cervantes was a slave, and we're going to tear down his statue. Robert the Bruce, Voltaire. I mean, if anything, Voltaire was just like some of the people in the streets, but no, he's gone as well. Then you have abolitionists like Matthias Baldwin. One wag the other day said, the problem is that some of these individuals are just so historically illiterate, they don't even know what abolitionism is. They don't even know what an abolitionist is. Maybe they think it's a 1960s rock band. I don't know what, but they don't have a clue that you're talking about an individual here that actually did all they could to save the slaves, to fight against slavery, to provide schools for those once slavery ended. You can go down the long list. And if this is not enough, Gandhi, Cervantes, Voltaire, Baldwin, and guitarist Stevie Ray Vaughan. Yeah, I'm not making this up. People are not very bright. Of course, this comes from a generation which has been poorly taught in the schools, so that when we do these national historical analysis and say, what do you know about history, we find they can't place the Civil War in the proper half century. They can't tell you who won the Civil War. They cannot tell you who the United States fought against in World War II. It's just embarrassing. But I do love what the writers here say. What do Cervantes and Stevie Ray Vaughan have in common? Well, both of them are made of bronze. That's about it. And so it's just gotten out of hand. And you might say, okay, what are people saying about this? The quietness from some of the Democratic leaders should disturb you, but the president has certainly made some comments. Spoke, of course, in Tulsa, but let's talk about what he said, was it last night or the night before, I guess, at Turning Point USA. He said the left-wing mob is trying to demolish our heritage so they can replace it with a new oppressive regime. They're tearing down statues, desecrating monuments, and purging the centers. It's not the behavior, he says, of the peaceful political movement. It's the behavior of totalitarians and tyrants and people who don't love our country. A little bit later, he said, the left is not trying to promote justice or equality or lift up the downtrodden. They have one goal, the pursuit of their own political power. And if you give power to people that demolish monuments and attack churches and seize city streets and set fire to buildings, then nothing is sacred and no one is safe. Incredible. Okay, you might say, what are we doing? Not very much. Sadly, most of the local officials are running scared. How many times have we seen videos of people tearing down a statue, and the only thing the police seem to be doing is making sure nobody gets hit by the falling statue. They don't try to prevent them or anything. And so this is why in a couple of places, of course, the president has called out the National Guard just to protect our national monuments, but he's also now invoked what is called the Veterans Memorial Preservation Act. This may be the first time you hear about it here on Point of View. It's something that was signed into law back in 2003. The act allows for fines and 10-year jail sentences for anyone who, this is the quote, willfully injures or destroys any structure, plaque, statue, or other monument on public property commemorating the service of any person or persons in the armed forces of the United States. It doesn't protect everything, but it protects quite a bit. And so that's the action that has been taken by the president, and we'll see where that takes us in the future. Yesterday, Walter Williams actually posted a piece on Black history. Insults to Black history. If you're not familiar, he's an African-American economist at George Mason University. It's a very long piece, but I just thought I'd read a couple quotes that I thought were kind of interesting. One, he says, often ignored or even overlooked is the fact that as a group, Black Americans have made the greatest gains over some of the highest hurdles in a shorter span of time than any other racial group. He says, for example, if you total up the earnings and spending of Black Americans and considered us as a special nation, us because he considers himself part of that, with our own gross domestic product, we would rank within the top 20 richest nations. Then he gives us kind of a who's who. He talks about Colin Powell. He talks about Oprah Winfrey, Robert Smith, of course, Barack Obama, Michael Jordan. I mean, you can go down this long list. But then he says, okay, people are saying this is all due to systemic racism. And he says, I think a lot of it is due to dependency and irresponsibility, because he says chief among these policies is a welfare state. Back in 1965, when we were warned about this by Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a welfare state that has fostered a 75% rate of out-of-wedlock births and decimated the black family that survived Jim Crow and racism. Keep in mind that in 1940, the black illegitimacy rate was 11%, and most black children were raised in two-parent homes. So anyway, that is just another attempt by Walter Williams to say what's happening out on the street does not reflect the gains nor the future possible gains and all the things that are right with a free market economy where we reward initiative and investment rather than one that attempts to focus on victimization. So a lot more to cover, and we will do so in the next hour. We'll have Mark Mittelberg with us and then Jacki Daily Show. I think you'll enjoy both of those conversations with them. And if you would like to know a little bit more about what we've talked about, these articles that we've posted today address a variety of different topics. We've talked about this idea of one bill, one subject. We've talked about the statues and what has now unfolded into an attempt to completely erase American history. And what about the idea of Black Lives Matter movement? What do they really believe? And those are all available at the website pointofview.net. As you go there, you're going to find a couple of other things as well. We have my Viewpoints commentary today based on the book Lies Christians Believe, and that comes from Shane Pruitt, who has been with us in the past here on our Millennial Roundtable. And we have all sorts of other information that you will find, and most importantly, I hope you'll click on that banner now, because I'm sure they'll change it by the end of the program. When it says Give Now, we now have a matching grant. Is that amazing? And it's very significant. So that means your gift of $50 becomes $100. If you could just give us a one-time gift of $100, it becomes $200. And it really is unlocked only when we reach that level. So make sure that you show us, if you write a letter, that you want it to be part of that match. Make sure that you click on the button if you go to the website, because then we have to show and demonstrate that to Foster Freeze, who very generously offered to actually match that up to $50,000 up to, I guess he said July 15th. So that's even better than I would ever have prayed for or asked for, which is, I think, so typical in the Christian world. We've got a lot more to cover. We will do so. And while we take a break, perfect time to go to the website, pointofview.net, click on that button and say, hey, I want to join the match. We'll be back right after this.
Have you ever said, well, it can't get any worse than this? Here in 2020, I've stopped saying that. Just when you think difficulties have to end, it's something else. Never has there been a more important time to get good information about what's really happening in the nation and the world. And that means never has there been a more important time to jump on board the Point of View Truth Team. You have a critical role to play in stemming the tide of evil and participating in the cause for good. We have been called together for such a time as this, and all it takes is just a few minutes to visit our website or call us and join the team. Do that today. June is the end of our fiscal year, a time we're looking at what we can do in the second half of the year with so many big events ahead. And we really need to know that you are with us in the fight. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. We cannot afford to be silent. It is time for action. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to spend some time, first of all, talking about evangelism and apologetics, and then a little bit later we'll be talking with Jacki Daily. But first of all, we bring to the microphone Mark Mittelberg, and he is, of course, a best-selling author, been on the program with us before, and you might remember that when we had Lee Strobel on the other day, we talked about the Lee Strobel Center for Evangelism and Applied Apologetics at the Colorado Christian University. Well, Mark is actually now the executive director of that, and so we're going to talk about that and talk about evangelism, apologetics, some of those issues. You perhaps know him best as an individual that wrote Contagious Christian, and maybe you've even been through the training course, which I now understand is in about 20 different languages. And also, of course, later wrote the book Becoming a Contagious Christian, Becoming a Contagious Church, and, you know, all sorts of great resources there. Also, while we're talking about Lee Strobel, lots of times we would watch the Lee Strobel television program, Faith Under Fire, and Mark would show up there as well. Individual that has his master's degree from in philosophy and religion from Trinity International University, and also an honorary doctor of divinity from Southern Evangelical Seminary. So, Mark, always great to have you on the program.
Thanks so much, Kerby. Great to be back.
How do we kind of understand what has been coming together here? Because we've always sort of talked about the importance of systematic theology and training, but I'm starting to see a real development in recognizing that some of these programs talk about apologetics, but in particular, I think it shows your fingerprints and Lee's fingerprints that this particular school is called a Center for Evangelism and Applied Apologetics, because in some respects, apologetics, which is, again, the defense of the Christian faith, sometimes can be an academic enterprise, but with your heart for evangelism, we want to learn how to use these so that we can bring people to the foot of the cross. True?
That's exactly right. And really, I think there's two words in that title that are worth unpacking. The first is evangelism, and Lee and I both have always felt that that is the central goal, and that apologetics is a tool to help remove barriers to the gospel. So, you know, very important tool, and one that we've both studied a lot and written on and so forth. But ultimately, what the, you know, main value we want to talk about is evangelism, that we are left on this planet, Jesus said, to go into our world to make disciples, and not just to win arguments, but to win hearts, to win people to Christ as we preach the gospel. So that's the first thing that we really would emphasize, whereas some apologetics programs would be much more philosophical and kind of heady. And that really gets to the second word, and that is applied apologetics, which gets to the practical side. We are not so much looking for, you know, creating ivory tower scholars, though there's nothing wrong with them. That's just not our goal. Our goal is to help get ordinary people trained to lead and be active in their local churches and in their communities bringing down the barriers to the gospel, presenting the message, organizing ministries that can do the same, and reaching as many people as possible with the gospel.
Let's talk about this idea because, of course, you wrote and co-authored Becoming a Contagious Christian, but at the same time, we've had lots of books on evangelism, lots of seminars on evangelism, but if I take seriously some of the Lifeway and other surveys, most people don't do evangelism. What have you found?
Unfortunately, that is true, and I think there's a variety of reasons, and we could talk about a lot of them, but one of the core things we go after with the Contagious book and course and materials is the idea that I think stops a lot of people, and that is that I have to become something or be something I'm not, that I either need to become super, kind of a mini Josh McDowell in my own world. I have to be a real expert and have read 30 or 40 books or have a degree or two. And they go, I'm just not a superstar Christian. I can't do that. Or people way on the other side that think it's, you have to be something odd. You have to, kind of foist your faith on people that don't want to hear it, but you just push it. And I think we have all these images of stereotypes, or images and stereotypes of evangelism, both positive and negative, that keep us, ordinary believers, from saying, this is for me. And so what we do in the Contagious materials is we show a variety of biblical approaches, what we call styles of evangelism, that I think we can all do at least one of those, and it can get us engaged in sharing our faith.
Which brings us to another point just before we take a break, and that is some people say, look, I just can't do this. I'm not as smart as Lee Strobel, and I don't have all the expertise. But some just say, I'm willing to give it a try, but I don't know how I make that transition from talking about the weather or the lockdown or the coronavirus or whatever and talking about the gospel. So in some respects, that's another aspect of what you are trying to help people understand, because they're different kind of styles that people have, but it isn't as difficult as we might be led to believe.
No, and our friends are a lot more interested than we think they are.
Which, again, is, I think, really striking, because we tend to also, there's another example, think that, well, that's, they'd probably get upset with me. They'd never talk to me again. And be honest with you, I remember a neighbor or two I've talked to that never want to make eye contact with me again. So, I understand some of that. But in most cases, people are.
Some of that, yeah, but a lot of people are wondering why you never bring it up. If
this is so important to you and you never bring it up, why didn't you not bring it up? So I think that's a good point. And if nothing else, it's just an illustration, again, if people want to go through some of the training that you, of course, have had all these years through the Contagious Christian Training Series, that is the case. But it does seem to me, and after we take a break, I thought we'd talk about what is available at the Lee Strobel Center. Great. And again, we have a link there. It's ccu.edu/Strobel Center. But you don't even have to remember all that, because right under the picture that we have of Mark is the Lee Strobel Center. And when we come back, we want to talk about that, because we're talking about both evangelism, which I've mentioned, and the idea of applied apologetics. Now, you might say, well, they're up there in Colorado. I'm not moving to Colorado. Not a snowflake's chance I'm going to go over there because that's, so far away, and we broadcast, Mark, in 42 different states. And I can see how people that are in Maine or in New Hampshire or in Alaska saying that's not going to happen. And so when we come back from the break, I'm sure you have a solution for that, which I think most of our listeners probably already know, and how wonderful this is to be able to continue in whatever God has given you, the business you have, maybe even the ministry you have, and still get the kind of training that they're going to be providing. So again, you can find all the information we're talking about here at the website pointofview.net, or you can simply go to Colorado Christian University, which is ccu.edu, and find it there as well. So let's take a break, and when we talk a little bit more about what it would be like if you said, I'd really like to learn from these people. They really seem to know how to do this. And I know that I would be much more effective if somebody could sharpen my iron, because iron sharpening iron is certainly a very good and important thing to do. And if you'd like to maybe even be mentored or discipled by some of these individuals, you're going to have a chance to hear from some of the best of the best. So let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Mark Mittelberg and the Lee Strobel Center for Evangelism and Apologetics. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You've heard most of them before. They're little phrases and one-liners that Christians and even non-Christians say in order to encourage you. You might be going through some tough struggles, and they remind you, God won't give you more than you can handle. At a funeral for a child, someone will likely explain, God gained another angel. And of course, there are millions of people who believe that God just wants you happy, and you need to believe in yourself. Fortunately, Shane Pruitt has been willing to tackle these and other false one-liners in his new book, 9 Common Lies Christians Believe. He was on the Point of View radio talk show recently to discuss his book. Shane wrote about these common lies because of his own experience. When his wife and he adopted a disabled child from Uganda, they faced numerous surgeries for him and major emotional challenges. That is why his first chapter addresses the lie that God won't give me more than I can handle. He takes on that misunderstanding both with personal examples and sound biblical interpretation. Some of the lies we believe have been challenged in society. Common lie number 5 says you must follow your heart. Mike Rowe is known for his work on such TV programs as Dirty Jobs and Returning the Favor. No doubt you have seen his YouTube videos or TED Talks about how we are doing a disservice to so many young people by telling them merely to follow their heart. Shane also addresses some important theological errors. Common lie number 6, God doesn't really care, and common lie number 8 is, I don't think God likes me. He hears these comments not only in this country, but even when he has traveled to Africa. I recommend this book for a sermon series, for small groups, and for individual study. We need to reject these lies and embrace God's truth on these issues. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Mark Mittelberg with us as we are talking about, again, the Lee Strobel Center for Evangelism and Applied Apologetics. It is at the Colorado Christian University. He's the executive director there. And I think already, Mark, some are saying, well, if I can study under somebody like Mark and Lee, that's enough. But there's more, isn't there? So let's, if we can, talk about what is available to listeners who may say, I'd like to know a little bit more about how to begin to be educated and to learn from some of these scholars that you're bringing in.
Great. Well, I think the first thing, just to respond to what you were raising before the break, and that is, doesn't matter where you live, these are online courses. And we're developing right now, we're launching 30 courses this fall, both at a undergrad and grad level. And 30 is just the beginning. We've got a whole lot more coming over the next 2 years that are being developed. And these are practical courses you can take and do the work at home and do online and get accredited degrees, again, undergrad or grad level, in apologetics or evangelism, studying things like the Case for Christ or the apologetics of C.S. Lewis, personal evangelism, church-based evangelism. I could go through, I've got a list of 30 here, studies on world religions, Islam, relativism and truth, on and on. And I think it's important to say, we talked before the break about how we can learn how to do personal evangelism, and we certainly have courses on that. But our goal is to also help shape leaders who can lead these areas in local churches, and that's a big part of our model. that we just had an article about last week, how we believe every church is missing, or virtually every church, a few have this, but most churches are missing a leader in place who's going to lead this area of evangelism. And we think this is vital in our world today, and that's a lot of our goal with this Strobel Center, is to train people who can lead in these areas of evangelism and apologetics in every local church in America and throughout the world.
And Lee was talking about that last time he was on, because if you think about this, we have sort of adapted and implemented kind of an academic model, and yet ultimately I think most of the work needs to take place within the local church. And if you have somebody that has a gift for evangelism, has a desire for evangelism, or you have somebody who's really been studying the apologetics, I want to speak to the pastors out there. I know sometimes they can just drive you crazy sometimes with all their demands and everything, but put them in a position where they can encourage others to do so, because we can't always expect, if you will, the professionals out there to do it all. We expect that all of us are given the opportunity to go out and make disciples, and there's a tendency sometimes for us to go to church and watch the professionals, give them a round of applause, walk out and say, okay, you go get them. And the pastor's going, no, wait a minute. There's no way I could even talk to the kind of people you see every day, because you have the entree into their lives, and I want to equip you to make the difference. So I think this idea of leadership training is really something, again, which you excel at, something you've done before, and something that is absolutely necessary in the body of Christ right now.
Absolutely, and it's biblical. If you look at Ephesians 4:11, it lists the offices of the church. One of them is in Ephesians 4:11, says there is an office of the evangelist, and then you got to quickly keep reading, because it's not someone that's going to do evangelism for everyone else. It says the person in that role will equip the saints, equip the people in the church for the works of ministry. So we believe this is a biblical model, and one that is practically, almost obvious. Whatever's important in a church has a leader in charge of it. You think about it, youth ministry is important, there's a youth leader. Music ministry is important, there's a worship leader or a choir leader or whatever it is. Well, is evangelism important? Do we really believe that we're here to fulfill the Great Commission? Well, if so, you've got to have someone in charge of it. And so for pastors out there, the question is, who is that person and how are you going to equip them? Well, let Lee and me and the people that are teaching with us, let us equip those people through the Strobel Center so that you've got someone, whether it's a lay person or a full or part-time staff person, but you've got someone in place that can be in charge of fulfilling the Great Commission in your local community through your church. And that's a biblical model, and I'll tell you, it's one that will change your church and change your community.
Well, again, some people might say, okay, how do I get that information? Because if you scroll down, you get to a part here where it says bachelor's degrees and master's degrees. So you click on, let me just pick master's degrees, and then it tells you about that. But then it says see bachelor's degrees. You say, well, I want to see the master's degrees. Well, if you click on the one that says see bachelor's degrees, it actually now takes you to the master's degrees in apologetics. So it's a little confusing.
Tell our team that.
Yeah, and so it's really hard for people to finally find it. But then if you click through enough and keep, because I've had trouble ever since I saw this, I found my way to it. Then you can get the course catalog. You can see the tuition and fees. You can see what it was going to involve in terms of cultural engagement, global apologetics, innovative evangelism, and practical apologetics. And so really, I guess the question, Mark, a lot of people are saying is, okay, once I've kind of navigated this website, what's next? I guess there are some applications and things like that, because if nothing else, I really want to equip as many of our listeners out there so that they are good at sharing their faith and good at being able to answer questions that legitimately surface when you are engaged in evangelism.
Exactly. And that website, by the way, the easy link for that is just strobelcenter.com.
That might be a better way to go. Okay.
Yes, Strobel, Strobel Center, one word. So strobelcenter.com. And there's a video on there, or should be. It's about a 15-minute video of Lee and me when we first announced that we were taking registrations. And we really go into detail on this 15-minute video about the courses that we're offering and the goals and how people can proceed. And so you can look at that. You can look at the courses. If, for instance, you wanted to become an evangelism leader in the church, we have degrees that emphasize both in undergrad and graduate level those areas of just practical evangelism. And so that's one of the options that you'll see there, or practical apologetics. Or we also have cultural engagement as well as global apologetics, which would be more missions-oriented. So those are our four main areas at both undergrad and grad levels. And you can sign up for, a whole, for a degree, or you may just want to take a few classes. I should add that the registration fee is waived if you use the code word Strobel, and so you can put that in and save whatever that fee is. But I would just urge people to check it out. And again, whether you want to really jump in with both feet or dabble a little and take a course or two, but these are going to be practical, helpful courses, and they're mission-driven to help equip you and help equip your church to fulfill the purpose Jesus left us on this planet for, to reach more and more people for Christ.
And you got kind of a who's who of people that I know you and Lee are lining up. So yeah, it's worth it just to learn from the two of you, but then to recognize some of the other people that will be part of these courses as well is just very rich indeed, and one more reason for people to sign up.
Absolutely. And boy, our world needs it today more than ever, don't you think?
I would think so. Mark, always great to have you on the program. If you happen to see Lee Strobel, say hello again for us. And we just wanted to give another push for this because I just think it's going to be a great opportunity for people to learn. And if you've got a computer, you're ready to go. And you'll have a chance to learn from some of the best and the brightest in the Christian world. And so, again, this is part of the Lee Strobel Center for Evangelism and Applied Apologetics. So, Mark, always great to have you on the program with us.
Great to be on, and thank you, Kerby, for what you have done for so many years, for so many of us, to train us, and the books you've written and the ministries you've led. You're a hero to me, and I hope people realize the impact you have for the kingdom.
Well, that was very kind. Thank you so much, Mark, and look forward to the next opportunity. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking with Jacki Daily for just a little bit, but you just heard, if you were on with us last hour, something that came because Foster Freeze was with us, and he was on for about a half an hour and said, you know what, I really want to encourage people to give to your ministry, and so I am going to suggest that I will match dollar for dollar any amount that comes in up to $50,000, and he even extended it past June 30th to, July 15th. And so I would hope we could just meet it all by the actual end of the fiscal year, which is next week. And it's going to come fast and furious, but I guess we'll get a chance to keep maybe a little bit open for those individuals. And then wherever we are on July 15th, we'll report this is what it is. And most of the time we meet the match. Sometimes we don't. And so we'll get whatever we can get. And so you're really the person that's going to help us meet the match. So your gift right now would make a difference. Dollar for dollar. We'll take a break. We'll have some more to say right after this.
If you thought the first half of 2020 was newsworthy, can you even imagine what's coming in the next 6 months? Coronavirus, the economy, social unrest, and an election. One thing I know, Point of View plans to be here for every important event, and as June comes to a close, so does our fiscal year. God has provided, but we're still a long way from where we need to be prepared for this important time. As Kerby says in his most recent letter, both Point of View and you have been brought together for such a time as this. God always knows what we need to be prepared, and this is the time to ask yourself, what is my role? Do your part to strengthen God's people for the days to come. Make Point of View your megaphone for the stretch run of 2020. Visit pointofview.net/team and do what you can. Or call 1-800-347-5151. This is not a time where we can afford to be silent. It is time for action. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Been looking forward to this interview with Jacki Daily, and if you're not familiar with her, she is a senior fellow at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, actually part of what is called the Life Powered Initiative. Also the host of the Jacki Daily Show, which I suspect many of you are perhaps familiar with, aired on, for example, on Glenn Beck's TheBlaze. You can see it on your radio dial, podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, SoundCloud, and a number of others. Individual that brings just a lot of expertise, healthcare policy, energy policy. Kind of reminds us a little bit of some of the conversation we had with Dr. Merrill Matthews, in part because she served as general counsel to an engineering firm specializing in energy and national security. Also, and we want to talk about this issue of religious liberty with her, she was, of course, the legal counsel on Capitol Hill to the chairman of the subcommittee on the Constitution. And tomorrow, of course, we're going to have Kelly Shackelford and Lathan Watts of First Liberty. But again, I would love to look a little bit at some of the First Liberty and religious liberty kinds of ideas. A graduate of Marshall University, Oxford University, also the University of Zaragoza in Spain, as well as an alum of the Vanderbilt University Law School, where she served as the president of the law school's Federalist Society chapter. And Jacki, just a great resume, but also just a very gifted talk show host. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
Well, me too. Let's, if we can, maybe talk about this idea of religious liberty. And I will leave a lot of that to our guys tomorrow. And sometimes we have Penna Dexter here and others. But Kelly Shackelford didn't expect that he's going to have to fight so many battles on religious liberty. But it began to be very obvious that, while we've had the issue of the pandemic, and while there may be some very good reasons for the lockdown, very quickly we began to see that some kind of bent towards their totalitarian impulses and began to make statements and to lock down churches and religious gatherings and threaten not only religious liberty, but sometimes civil liberties. And I know you've been talking about that, and I'd just love to get your thoughts.
Well, I think it was not lost on many of us that there was an apparent, very clear double standard that became, obvious within weeks, that there was not going to be equal application to religious communities versus non-religious communities. And then when the riots happened, and these were non-socially distanced riots throughout the country, we saw very little rush to clamp down on that as a potential conveyor of COVID-19 compared to church services. And there are many famous cases across the country that made headlines. And I'm sure that Kelly Shackelford will tell you tomorrow about his case where he had to challenge a ban on drive-in church in Louisville, Kentucky, a challenge that he won, thankfully. But it became so obvious that in certain states with certain types of leadership, there would be discrimination against religious gatherings, and the emergency powers are where these kinds of things get out of control. So I would say to your listeners, always look for the abuses and encroachment to happen when there's a war, let's say after 9/11. Maybe there's a pandemic. Maybe there's a natural disaster. For whatever reason, there's a legitimate reason for the government to have to act. And what they will do is then exercise their worst impulses at that time. And once you hand over your rights, it's very difficult to ever get them back. So emergency by emergency, you lose your rights. You saw this after 9/11 with the war on terror legislation. I was on Capitol Hill for part of that, where, things get extreme. Not only can the TSA pat you down rather intimately and look through everything you own, but the government was also spying on American citizens without warrant at times in the name of countering terrorism. The scandal from Glenn Greenwald and others revealed that, in fact, the government was looking at all of our phone logs without permission.
Wow.
And that was deemed perfectly legal, but it wouldn't have been in the past. So it's things like this that are in the history books for taking away people's rights, and it just starts the trajectory in the wrong direction, and you don't get it back without some extreme action. So that's my concern right now, and it's the religious community that seems to be the favored target recently.
And one of the things you talk about is something we have in our little booklet here, a biblical view on privacy and surveillance. We have seen how that has really expanded dramatically after, as you said, after 9/11, and it's just expanded again. And I've jokingly said I really probably just need to completely rewrite it because things we wouldn't have anticipated have happened. Of course, that's also due to FISA or warrants and all sorts of other things. But just for a minute, I sense there is the argument that people have been making about reopenings, and given the fact that Texas Governor Greg Abbott has said, well, maybe now we're going to pause any other efforts of reopening. I know you've been on some radio shows. I think you were up on one in Chicago where you were talking about the reopening of the economy. We have to keep the economy open, but we also got to figure out a way to make sure that we don't overwhelm the hospitals, I guess the best way to say it, because what we're finding right now is kind of a spike, not just in various infections, but maybe even an increase in the hospitals. Can you help us navigate through some of that?
Yeah, so I did check up on that today when Governor Abbott was making his announcement, and it looks like Texas still has plenty of hospital beds and ICU beds, even though there's a spike in cases. So what happened is the media had kind of transitioned from looking at fatalities or hospitalizations to cases. And that can easily panic people because there's no way you can stop the virus from moving through the population. It's just going to do that. And when you reopen, and especially when you have the riots, as I mentioned earlier, it is just inevitable. There's going to be a spike in cases. Governor Abbott, I think, is well within his powers to say, look, if we do something and we see a bad result, we can always correct course. I think it's better to reopen it and let people have their lives back, not just their professional lives and their economic lives, but their social lives, which is critical to our emotional and psychological well-being, and make adjustments where we need to as we have more and more information. What I was talking about on that Chicago show that you mentioned on The Answer was an op-ed that I wrote in Real Clear Politics, right, where I explained the cost in human life of shutdown. And no one was talking about this at the time. Everyone was only focusing on lives that would be lost to COVID-19. And I just did a quick summary in my op-ed of how many people could die or be very badly impacted health-wise if we stay shut down. And as a quick example, the Fed at that time in St. Louis was saying that we could have a 30% spike in unemployment. Well, the research shows that for every 10% spike in unemployment, you get 30,000 suicides. That means if the Fed were right back in April, we would be looking at 90,000 suicides. So, according to past research. And then you go into the fact that all of the transplants, heart transplants, liver transplants, kidney transplants, were paused by the governors as being elective surgeries. They're not emergent. If it's an emergency, it's different. But so transplants were shut down. All of the screenings for cancer were shut down, like mammograms or a woman's annual exam. I mean, there are 5 cancers in this country that we screen for on a regular basis, including like melanoma, prostate cancer, and those screenings all came to a stop indefinitely. So I just went online and found out how many of these new cases are diagnosed every year. And it was between 500,000 and 1 million cases of cancer that could have been screened but weren't being screened. So that's just a quick sampling of some of what I found.
Well, and again, we need to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about some of those issues. I have a commentary that came out on June 5th called Counting the Cost, looking at some of the lives that might be lost because, as we pointed out, maybe there wasn't screening. And then there's one that was done by Scott Atlas at Stanford University in which he looked at the accumulated years of life lost, compared that, and it's not even close. The years of life lost by those who affected by the lockdown is just off the charts compared compared to the expected lifetimes of some of the COVID-19 patients, in part because some of them were elderly. So you can look at it in a variety of different ways and see exactly what Jacki had put together in her piece. And I think there have been others that have come back and reinforced that idea as well. When we come back from the break, though, I do want to get her perspective on a couple of issues. First of all, she's quite the expert on energy. Comes from a long line, I understand, of energy workers and others that have been involved in this field. And with the Green New Deal and a variety of other ideas that are going to be front and center at the Democratic National Convention. Wanted to get her thoughts about that. Of course, healthcare is another issue, which we sort of alluded to in passing. And what about Medicare for all? Oh, there's a lot to talk about, and that's why I'm looking forward to future opportunities of getting Jacki on the program with us. But we'll continue our conversation with her right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes with Jacki Daily. Let me just mention we have JackiDaily.com, and that's one link that you can find, and you can find various episodes of the program and go from there to find out more about her, find her blog, her articles, and so many other things. But again, given your expertise both in energy and in healthcare, I thought we need to prepare our listeners for the fact that when the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic National delegates meet, they will craft a platform, and I'm pretty convinced now, looking at where that is going, that they will, first of all, let's talk energy, talk about the Green New Deal. You've been working in the area of energy policy for years. What are your concerns about this idea of a Green New Deal?
Well, it's completely unrealistic and unaffordable at about $93 trillion. estimated. I mean, try to imagine that. Yeah, right. The U.S. national debt is about $23 trillion. If you're not counting unfunded liabilities, which is like Medicaid, Social Security, now you're getting up to closer to $100 trillion. Well, the Green New Deal is about the same size as all of that.
Wow.
And the country's been around for 243 years, and we've only worked up to, $24 trillion in debt so far. But they would almost, multiply that by 4 for just the price tag of the Green New Deal. So it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. I mean, someone may as well come to me and ask for a $5 million contribution to their charity. I don't have it. It's not there. That's not going to happen. But it's a major marketing piece for them. It's right in line with alarmism that really scares people into doing things like voting for certain candidates. If you put something that big together, people take it seriously if they're unfamiliar with the budget and the environmental situation. Because the facts are that the United States is already the #1 country for reducing carbon emissions on Earth. We're #1.
#1.
And the reason for that has nothing to do with government policy. It has only to do with the free market, because we transitioned our electricity generation from coal to natural gas because of fracking. Natural gas became so cheap that it could outcompete coal. A lot of people thought it was the Obama administration's war on coal that took coal down, and that certainly didn't help. But the fact is that natural gas, even though opposed by the Obama administration because they tried to ban fracking on federal lands and all that, took off on state and private lands and brought us to where we are. And so natural gas has far fewer carbon emissions than coal. So as a result, our emissions went way down. We are also the top industrialized country in clean air. If you look at the 6 federally regulated pollutants, which is like ozone, lead, carbon monoxide, a number of things, you'll find that they all have gone down more than 70% in our air since 1970. So today, we're breathing much cleaner air than our grandparents did.
Very true.
And when it comes to, it's amazing. I mean, we have so much to be proud of. And in terms of the deadly air pollution, which is called PM 2.5, which stands for particulate matter 2.5, we blow other countries away. Like Europe cannot hold a candle to us when it comes to clean air and particulate matter. Yet we go to these international conferences and they're constantly shaming the United States for abdicating its leadership position on environmental issues. Nothing is further from the truth.
It's just amazing.
Yeah. So whatever the Democrats are selling in that platform with the Green New Deal, we have to ask, what are they solving? Because we share the globe with everyone. We're already reducing our emissions so impressively with no government requirement to do so. And, I mean, the clean power plant is gone, basically. It's kind of on its last gasp. So as we do that, China and India and others are polluting like crazy and building new coal plant after new coal plant after new coal plant. So this plan that the Democrats have does not do any good because the rest of the world, 95% of the rest of the world is not governed by the United States. And they're going to do whatever they want. So we control 5% of the world's population, 5% of the world's surface of the earth, and that's it. That's all.
And again, if you're going to be anti-American, you use that as a cudgel against them, but nevertheless, that is the case. Just about out of time, and we may get to some of those other issues like healthcare in the future, but let's talk about what's on your website, because I think some people would love to listen to the podcast, read some of your articles and blog and some of the other materials. So it's at JackiDaily.com. So talk about what they will find when they land on the website.
So JackiDaily.com is really an educational show on Glenn Beck's network. and it's meant to just educate the average American in an entertaining and conversational way about energy and environment policy, because I feel that no one is telling the good news and the great side of energy like I just did. And so you'll find information on Jacki Daily that's very hard to find at any other mainstream media source, and really provides you with, the ammo that you need whenever you're attacked by people who don't share your views, or being indifferent to the environment, or being a polluter, or not caring about an existential threat, which is what they think that global warming is. You can come to my site and get some really hopeful, positive news. And I'm really easy to find on Twitter at Jacki Daily Show, on Parler, which I like even better because it's not the censorship that you get on Twitter.
That's right.
Everyone's going to Parler now. In the past week, I was a little bit ahead of them, but it's a really good idea. And I'm on Instagram and Facebook, of course, and easy to find on podcasts, just whether it's iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify. I'm on all of them. So find me anytime. You can communicate with me there too, and join the mailing list.
And I might just mention that when we show your picture, we have your link to Facebook and Twitter, and as well as the website, and we have all of that as well at the website, pointofview.net. So, Jacki, just great to have you on the program. I'd love to have you in studio sometimes. I'd love to have you be on the program, and I appreciate you giving us some time today here on a Thursday.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'd love to be with you anytime. So you say when, and I'll show up.
We'll do it. Well, that's all we got for today, and it has been a couple of hours as we've covered just all sorts of issues, but I'm still looking at pieces of paper I never talked about, and of course, I guess we'll postpone those till tomorrow. Kelly Shackelford will be here, and Lathan Watts will be here, and I will be here, I would assume, and we'll certainly take on some of those very important issues that have surfaced this week, and we'll follow a little bit more on what lockdowns may or may not take place, the whole battle over the culture in terms of everything from statues to policies, and certainly we'll be talking about all of those issues. But as we wind down for today, let me just mention that we were privileged to hear from Foster Freeze, who said, you know what, I want to match any gift that is coming in between now and actually extended it to the 15th of July. So don't wait, though, because I'd love to just get this done and cleared up by the end of our fiscal year, which is June 30th. That would certainly help us look better for a variety of different reasons. So if you can help us out as we go off the air, there are just some ways in which you can participate. The simplest one is to go to the website, pointofview.net. But we also have a pledge line that you can call, 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Or, of course, you want to write to us, Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas, 75221. But those are ways you can help us out, and we would greatly appreciate it, and every dollar doubled. Elisa, Ivy, and Andrew, thank you for your help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Point of View.
Have you ever said, well, it can't get any worse than this? Here in 2020, I've stopped saying that. Just when you think difficulties have to end, it's something else. Never has there been a more important time to get good information about what's really happening in the nation and the world. And that means never has there been a more important time to jump on board the Point of View Truth Team. You have a critical role to play in stemming the tide of evil and participating in the cause for good. We have been called together for such a time as this, and all it takes is just a few minutes to visit our website or call us and join the team. Do that today. June is the end of our fiscal year, a time we're looking at what we can do in the second half of the year with so many big events ahead. And we really need to know that you are with us in the fight. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. We cannot afford to be silent. It is time for action. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.